But yet I live in a world where the color of my skin is used to define me, describe me, set boundaries on who I am meant to be, what I am, judge what I say, and even cast aspersions on my character. This is the 21st century, and racism is another form of slavery, but just without visible chains.
Women's rights activist and lawyer Shola Mos-Shogbamimu
is the lawyer and activist Dr Shola Mos-Shogbamimu.
Discuss more with Dr Shola Mos-Shogbamimu, a lawyer and co-organiser of the Women's March London.
The symbolic representation of how George Floyd died is representative of that knee. That knee is the suffocation of Black people. That knee represents so much about what is institutionally racist in the United States and in the United Kingdom. If you do not know me, let me introduce myself. I am African. I've got the blood of royalty flowing in my veins. I'm a woman. What you see in me, there's more than what you see, because I am fearless, warrior, queen. I'm a child of God. This light, you cannot begin to comprehend. And what you can't comprehend, you seek to contain. And what you can't contain, you seek to condemn. This is why I resist. Woo!
This is the History Society's first event for Black History Month, and we're delighted to be joined for an in conversation with Dr Shola Mos-Shogbamimu, led by lecturer at the University of Exeter, Dr Sabiha Allouche. So without further ado, let's get on with tonight's event, and I hope you all enjoy. Thank you very much to both of you.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Daniel, for organizing. I'm Sabiha, and it gives me a great pleasure, actually, to be in conversation today with our guest speaker, Dr Shola Mos-Shogbamimu. We're celebrating the month of October, Black History Month, and yeah, I hope you are as excited as I am. And just like Jack said, I think without further ado, let's go ahead. And so for Shola, there are a few questions. Some of them are prepared by the students. I will take advantage of the opportunity, and I will ask you also a couple of questions I'm interested in. And I think we could begin with, well, so is there anything different about this year, about 2020's Black History Month, right, following all the events that have been going on since the month of April? And as you have described it yourself, the genesis of a cultural revolution.
Oh, absolutely. Look, 2020 is an unprecedented year for so many reasons, and it lends a different sort of lens into Black History Month, almost forcing people to prioritize it in a way that they never would have before. I mean, take a good look at how we started out the year. The year started off, I remember very clearly, at the start of the year with the whole debacle and hoo-ha over Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, and the whole noise and the talk about whether or not the British society and British media, whether there was any sort of racist or racism, should I say, within the response that has been thrown at them, right? That is how this conversation started off at the beginning of the year, with so many different of opinions out there and different kinds of arguments. I got into a few televised debates where, no, it's not this, yes, it's that. And it's not like we were even allowed to take, a breath or anything. The next thing we knew, we were hit by COVID-19, right? And COVID-19, what it did was to put a magnifying glass on the long-standing structural inequalities in our country because of the discriminatory impact on Black people and ethnic minorities. And when people ask, well, why are Black people and ethnic minorities, why do they appear to be more impacted? Some people wanted to come up with every reason aside from inequality. They were ready to blame the food we eat, our culture. And I'm like, you know what? If culture and food was the issue, then the entire continent of Africa and Asia should have been overwhelmed by COVID-19. But that's not the case. So there must be a different reason. And the different reason is right there in front of you, that those who experience, or I mean those who experience inequality, what happens with this pandemic is that it exacerbates the exposure to it. So whether it's housing inequality, health inequality, all kinds of things. And before we could even get through that, we were hit by the series of, you know, visible police brutality. In the US, we started a whole conversation about police brutality here in the UK. This has always gone on. It's always existed. For some people, it might have been a new thing, but I do not know any Black person that was shocked by George Floyd's death. I know many Black people who were utterly pissed off, like I was, outraged, and feeling helpless at the same time. But for a number of people who thought surely society has moved on, this was a shock to their system. And then when people see things like, I don't know how many people out there are familiar with Amy Cooper, the lady in the Central Park in New York, who called the police on a Black man because he asked her to put a leash on her dog. And the way she did it and the reason she did it opened people's eyes to how covert and overt racism is. And so what you then had where, of course, you had the protests and the movement and the expression, people visibly expressing their frustration, their anger, their pain, and everything that was going on. And that led to more conversations. And I mean the kind of conversations that you cannot run away from. So even at schools, in the workplace, people were speaking up, particularly Black people who were tired of being quiet, or who were no longer interested in not being defined as a troublemaker. You know, the moment you say something that people are not expecting you to say, this, oh, you're a troublemaker, you're trying to change status quo. And this year was the year where a lot of people, including white allies, and we'll talk about allies, I'm sure, at some point, who go, you know what, this is wrong. And the brilliant thing about it is, what it then does with Black History Month is it's shown a light in such a way that you have to take this month, even though Black history should be celebrated every single day of the year, right? But you have to take this month in this year very seriously in learning, listening, educating yourself, in lending a hand. You know what I mean? So that is what I think has made or is making Black History Month this year very different.
Thank you. I think this is a great opening answer, because I actually put down a few, questions and observations. And I wonder, what would your response be to those who say, this is the UK, our police is gentle, this is, it's nothing like the US, police institution. So what would you say to them?
I would tell them to open their eyes and take a good look, because they are living they are totally delusional. The fact that police on the street here don't use guns, right, does not mean that what they do use is not as bad as what police who exercise such police brutality in the States do. Now, understand that as far as I'm concerned, most police are good police. But the problem with with police as an institution is the way it has covered bad police, which has marginalized good police, which has it has totally caused the breakdown of trust between community and police. That has been the problem. They cannot say that police brutality does not exist in this country, because we have too many examples of the fact that there are Black people who have died in the custody of police in this country. It might not have been gun death if they were beaten to death, the way they were treated, the way they were manhandled, it led to their death. Okay? So police brutality is not just by the hands of somebody with a gun. And we always also have to understand this. When we talk about institutional racism, whether it's at the hands of the government or at the hands of the police or any other form of institution, it boils down to this single fact. It is the denial of an equal value of life and liberty to Black people. Bottom line, that is what it is. And what police brutality does is it does that, because if someone dies, that denies them life. If somebody is put into custody for the wrong reasons, again, that denies them liberty. Or the fact that, Black people particularly are disproportionately targeted for stop and search. During the national lockdown, the data is out there that 80% of Black people that were stopped, there was no probable cause to stop them, and they were searched, and they didn't do anything wrong. There are just too many of these examples. So, no, the United Kingdom is just as institutionally racist as the United States of America.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sure we will go back to, the institution and the state and the police at some point. And to carry on with the topic of Black History Month, I agree with you, right? There shouldn't be a start date and end date for Black History Month. And having said that, do you not worry about, again, the institutionalization, of diversity, of this maybe sometimes add and stir, approach to talking, about Black history? So my question for you would be, in which way do you think schools and universities are failing Black History Month?
Oh, they failed from the very start with preschool, reception, primary school. We are not teaching the truth about Black history, because you see, Black history is British history. And when we don't reflect how the start, so we don't celebrate our African, Afro-Caribbean, British citizens who have contributed significantly. We don't portray the Caribbean or the continent of Africa in a positive light, so that you get some children who are like, oh, are there libraries in African countries? Or do you drive cars? Where did they get that idea from? Because it sure as heck did not come from me, right? It is things like this, and the way the perception, the negative perception, is it can be done away with if the right level of education is given from the get-go. And that also means when you, for instance, look at Windrush generation and their significant contribution to this country. If you think about it, if when they came in the 60s and so, their contribution had been talked about, I think that a lot of the ignorance against, a lot of the ignorance that drives the whole narrative about deporting them, that ignorance will not be there, because the generation of the time that the Windrush people came, they were at a time that they could have passed on the right kind of messaging to their own children, to the next generation. And so we would not be voting in governments that will see the Windrush generation as non-British. They were British when they came in, they were British when they stayed here, and then they're being kicked out for all kinds of reasons. Okay, so I don't need to go into the particulars. But the point is, by not educating, what we have done in this country is to lead and to lead to a festering of ignorance about the contribution of ethnic minorities in this country. So that, who is British today should not be defined by the color of our skin. It should be defined by who we are. We are British. There should be so much more to being British than the color of your skin. Somebody tweeted something against me a couple of days ago, in which because I speak out against racism, she identified me as being anti-white. And not only that, she goes ahead to say, you just don't like the indigenous white population in this country. I'm like, when do white people become indigenous? Did I miss something? But it's things like that. It's only ignorant people that can talk like that and have this sense of, oh, the glorious days of the British Empire. What was so glorious about it? Whatever was good about it, you have to be taught also about what was not so great about it. But if people are not given that level of education, that is why we are where we are. We're still suffering from the legacy of colonialism, of slavery, because all of that mindset still exists today.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to address the magnitude, right, of the backlash that followed from Black Lives Matter, right? And like it's like it became more visible, and then this Pandora box of endless ignorant, comments, recontextualizing, forgetting, the historical evolution, etc. So, for example, for me, one of the things that really, really concern me is this conflation or lazy contrasting of race and class, and particularly the social category of class, right? It's very pronounced in Britain. This is a society that's very unequal, like class inequality is very unequal. And there was a time, a very brief time in history where, young and Black working class communities lived side by side, right? And lived together. And then it seems it's becoming increasingly distant, right?
I don't know about you, but when you say there was a time, when was this time? That I don't know this time you speak of, because even recent history takes us to the time just recently in the 60s and 70s, no dogs, no Irish, no Blacks. That was just how many years ago. So when we say, or when you say that Black people have lived side by side with say the white community, I think that we have to understand that there was a degree of tolerance. There was only so much tolerance they gave those Black people who lived in certain communities with them. That was not great even back then, because again, there was that social stigma of being Black. And to even get the right job that you're qualified for, it was clear that the system was trying to place Black people and ethnic minorities in a certain class, as you pointed out. But that class was not meant to be higher than working class. If there was a lower class than working class, maybe for some that's where they think Black people should be. So that there was a struggle back then. So I am not fooled and thinking that, oh, that means that, Black people were living relatively safe. No, 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 no. They were struggling. I mean, in America, as an example, yes, they had the whole issue of segregation, and it was right out there, whites only, Blacks only. But we had that here in the United Kingdom too. Aside from the signs that said no, no Blacks, no dogs, no Irish, even where there was no sign, it was written into the code of society. You immediately knew where you were not welcome. And it's the same as when you point out about class. So even amongst the class system in the United Kingdom, a working class man knows he can't just walk into a gentleman's club. Even just by what he's wearing, he's already judged as, you don't belong here. Think about that for a Black man. He would not even be able to think of, should I walk in there? So the class system and the intersectionality of that with discrimination, racism, that has been live and thriving for the longest time, which is why the movement goes deeper than just talking about one incident or two incidences of racism. You see, and you're right to point out the backlash, because you see the backlash to me was not because Black Lives Matter was wrong. The Black Lives Matter, the reason why there was all of this campaign to discredit the Black Lives Matter movement is because it threatened the status quo. It was going to mess up the status quo. This demand for equality, how dare you? Because equality for some people is oppression, while for us it's liberation. That is what caused and started all this nonsense about, oh, the movement is about Marxism. The movement is not the organization. The movement existed the ethos of the movement existed way back during the abolition of slave trade, because Black Lives Matter. It existed way back to decolonize all African countries, Asian countries from the British Empire. Again, with African countries, because Black Lives Matter. It existed to end apartheid because Black Lives Matter. It existed to bring about change through the civil rights movement in the United States and the United Kingdom because Black Lives Matter. That's the ethos.
Absolutely. And I think I wasn't clear. I should have been more nuanced and more clear, when I said, I was referring, like, for example, in the 50s, when we think about, there used to be international conferences, right, with African scholars in Manchester itself, for example, right, and with, scholars from Egypt, from South Africa, from Zimbabwe, and this was the moment, that I was.
But even in that moment, remember that the way I see it is that those Africans that would come for these international conferences will be amongst their fellow academics, right?
And elite and very removed.
And they were not coming to live in the United Kingdom and staying. They were going back to their countries. So again, even amongst academics that may be prejudiced, right? They could not be seen as a threat. Do you see what I mean? And I think that is part of the reason why 2020 really starts the hard conversation about race relations, and racism. Because what it does is the incidents that we've seen in 2020, it has triggered some people's prejudice and bias in a way that they probably never recognized. No, I'm not racist. I've got Black friends. I've got mixed race children. I've got a Black. I'm not racist. But there's a reason why you are triggered or behaving in a certain way that makes you anti towards Black people, towards the Black movement.
Right, and this feeling, right, of being threatened in an already precarious economy, in an already populist, right, global trend, etc., certainly doesn't make things easier.
Yeah.
But talking about, academia and activism, because these two sometimes clash, right, for the better or for the worse. Yeah. And I have a very nice question here on, intersectionality, right? Sometimes I teach intersectionality in pretty much all of my courses. And sometimes I feel this concept has been annihilated before it has even become known for what it actually is.
Yeah.
Is intersectionality only a buzzword these days?
I think for some people it probably is, but for us, it's a reality. I was just saying earlier today that the experiences of Black women, Black people, but if I just focus on Black women, the experiences of Black women, we don't get to choose and go, well, you see, on Monday, the inequality I experienced was sexism. Tuesday, I can tell you right now, it was misogyny. Wednesday was definitely racism. It doesn't work that way. It all intersects. Income inequality, all of that intersects. The ethnicity pay gap, it all intersects. Housing inequality, it all intersects. And I think the problem is that the systemic racism triggers all of these barriers. And because for the longest time, it is what we've had to fight against. We voice it, we don't voice it, we just keep striving, keep pushing against that barrier. I sometimes equate it to the fact that when you don't say anything, people think that you're okay. Because you see, those who run the system don't really care. They know exactly what they're doing to you, right? So whoever is dealing with your housing inequality knows that the housing inequality is going to impact Black people, ethnic minorities this way. Whoever is denying you income inequality knows that it is going to impact you this way. Are you telling me not one person, it doesn't occur to one person about how all of these things impact? Of course it has. Of course it has. Do you see what I mean? It's the people, the ways the system works is to deny an equal value of life and liberty to Black people. Liberty, when people say liberty, we say freedom, right? What is freedom but the right to choose? But how do you have the right to choose when you don't have the liberty to exercise that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Actually, this reminded me just when the lockdown started being lifted off and people went to the beaches, there were lots of photos of them, in Bournemouth. And I was looking, and that was also a very tense period, right? Because we were educating everyone around us about George Floyd, about everything that's happening. And you look at the photos of the beaches and you're like, where are the people of color, where are they? And
people of color are saying that COVID-19 is wiping out more people of color than it is, the white communities. And especially when you think about the key workers who are not even getting the right protective gear. You then have to apply some common sense that, look, you can't go and add more to your problems and directly bring that discriminatory impact of COVID-19 to you. No, it's common sense not to be, hanging around on the beach when there is no good handle on this pandemic. Yeah, I know. Where were they? Trying to protect themselves.
Absolutely. And, is it simply about common sense, or is it also, I think the uniqueness of COVID, that's the way I like to think about it. It's the first time the majority, right, of white people, like privileged people, because of their white skin, have been, called out, right? This is the first time they were pushed out of their comfort zone. This is the first time they were told, well, you know what? No, you're going to stay home. You're going to wear a mask. I don't care.
Right.
And right, whereas these confinements, like self-imposed confinements, there's a, like the same with the prom, with the BBC and all these, like, again, where are the people of color? Where are the British nationals, right? Black British citizens? Why do we not see them in these spaces? And, racism, exactly like you're saying, right? It doesn't have always to be with a poster clearly saying, no dogs, no Irish, no black, right? Sometimes it's just an affect, it's a feeling.
Exactly.
Nothing resonates with you, right? In the food you see and the music you hear and this and that.
Right.
So absolutely. I want to find a little bit my well, I mean, I try to, I think we live in an age where it's difficult to think only, like, I don't want to think about Britain in vacuum, right? And I want to link it a little bit to the US. And what better day than, the next day to the debate that happened between, I think you've already told us why the current situation in America is important, for the British context. But is there a two-way teaching process? Like, what do you think the US could also learn from the British context? Because we often talk about, the British context learning from the US, but what about the other, right? And this idea of the US exceptionalism, we have never colonized anyone, we are...
I see Jack Hall exception when it comes to this issue of institutional racism. And, if you take it back, if you take it into historical context, the legacy of slavery started here in the UK. America's at the time was an extension of the United Kingdom. Bottom line, and what the United Kingdom at the time did was all of their unfavorable people. What did they do? They dumped them in the New World. And once they started to see how profitable they could do things in the New World. They started sending some of their big guns there, but then they needed labor. And they decided to maximize on the transatlantic slave trade. Right? That is the key reason why white folks prospered in America. So to me, if there's a question about what can America learn from British and vice versa, they need to learn the same thing. Whether I do not see, like I said, both countries are institutionally racist towards Black people. The system is created that way. Do not be fooled by, oh, actually, in Britain, we're so much more tolerant. That's nonsense. The fact that you don't write it on your forehead, or you're not carrying, I don't know, burning crosses and using the N word, every word, the words out of the white supremacists, and when I say white supremacists, remember, again, the white supremacists as we know them today, there are white supremacists who wear suits, who lead governments, who've existed for hundreds of years. I mean, when I say hundreds of years, the system has enabled them for hundreds of years, okay? So the way racism plays out and how it impacts Black people in society, be it British or American, is the same. The inequality is the same, yes? Now, this does not mean that that we don't have allies. Of course, there are white allies, and there were white allies during the civil rights movement, during the abolition of slavery, right? Who also spoke out, but they were the lone voices. Lone voices. It took a long time. Imagine in this country, they had to pay plantation owners to let go of their slaves. But they did not pay the slaves who for hundreds of years had given free labor. And people want to say, oh, let's congratulate the United Kingdom. And when you think about the United States, about how the South fought hard against the North. Why? Because they wanted to keep slaves as their property. They did not want to set their slaves free. I see the same mindset. I see the same issue. So it's not about one learning from the other. When as far as you can see it, they're bad as each other. So the progress that needs to be made today has to be one that, in the words of James Baldwin, he asked the question, when will white people progress? That's not American white people, British white people, all of them. When will they progress from this mentality that, as far as I'm concerned, has held them back? This whole sense of white supremacy is utter nonsense. Utter nonsense. There's no superiority of race. You manipulated people. You kidnapped people. That is not superiority of race. You lied to people. You stole from them. That's not superiority of race. That's nothing to be proud of, right? And so when you think of things like that, for me, it's not one learning from me. It's both learning and listening and changing. That is what needs to happen now.
I hear you, and I want to carry on with the line of, allyship. For example, one thing, right, that we often talk about during Black History Month, we tend to focus on the history of slavery, which is a very important history, obviously very underreported, but we also sometimes do not pay enough attention to other forms of anti-Blackness, right, around the world. And for example, I am Lebanese, and I'm sure you know about the sponsorship system, you know about the conditions that migrant laborers, whether they're male or female from the Indian subcontinent or from Eastern Africa, right, experience in the Gulf, in Lebanon. It's modern slavery, right? And it happens in front of the whole international community, and right. And there are levels of, again, of oppression, right? Marginalization by the society itself, by their employer, economically, etc. And because when you spoke also about George Floyd, right? He was shoplifting by an Arab shopkeeper, right? And this shop had apparently been robbed many times, and by law in the US, they were forced to hire private security. And it's like the whole system not only leads to obviously marginalizing communities, but also placing communities against each others, right? And making the solidarity work and the coalitional politics more difficult.
I think to your point, so first of all, he wasn't shoplifting. He bought groceries, and he was called. The police was called on him because the shop assistant thought that the money the check he used was counterfeit, that it was fake.
Okay.
And as far as I'm aware, it turns out it wasn't, right?
Right.
And I think your point is that the different forms of that the way the system works ends up turning communities against each other. But then let me draw on what you said earlier about the kind of anti-Blackness that exists in other countries like Lebanon. So I think that what happens is this anti-Blackness, it doesn't matter where the community moves to. It could be to the end of the world, center part of the world. If that mindset is there, it's going to show forth. And if they go to a place where the system already supports their anti-Blackness, it's going to amplify it. So for whatever reason that made that shop assistant call, whether it's because I think from what I understand, the shop owner, when he heard about it, said he would not have called. I don't have all the facts there, but the assistant said that they're meant to call the police, and that's what he did. But that when he saw the way the police was handling Judge Floyd, that look, this is the TV camera or the CCTV, that's not what they were expecting. But the thing is, it's out of your hands the moment you involve the police.
Exactly.
So that in a place like America and the United Kingdom, Black people don't feel they can trust the police, because as soon as police show up, who are they going to treat as a criminal? The Black person. End off. I think Don Butler, MP, who gave an example of how her brother said to her, if anything happens, don't call the police, call me.
Yeah.
And something was happening to her. She calls her brother. He comes to her rescue, and he's trying to protect her. And she's worried something's going to happen. She calls the police. The police show up and attack her brother.
Yeah.
Because he's Black. This is the lived experience of some Black people in this country. That's why I say, and I think to your point, that form of anti-Blackness, it does exist. So if you have somebody who has a very negative perception of anything that's perceived as Black, they're going to manifest this in schools, in the workplace, on the high street, on the bus. And because the system already supports that kind of thinking, it's easier for them to manifest it.
Absolutely. And absolutely. And like when we think about, yes, it's important to, anti-Blackness is everywhere. At the same time, right, sometimes there are different kinds and forms of anti-Blackness. But this also makes me think about, this idea that third world states should develop, should become, it's not only about building skyscrapers, right? What also comes with it is this very, very white view, right, about people of color. Yes, and yes, there have been slavery in different contexts, but right, it's not an easy question, right? But I think it's important to think that the hegemony of the West is not only in terms of the good and the development, like the ugly that comes along.
And I see what you're trying to say. Look, I've always said that the way systemic racism works is that it is not just national, it is international. Systemic racism impacts the way nations treat each other, so that even on the world stage, white nations still manipulate Black nations. I mean, it boggles the mind that white nations have literally looted many Black nations, right? But yet today, Many Black nations are in debt to white nations, to the International Monetary Fund. I'm like, why? I mean, why don't we start to calculate what you owe us? Maybe if we were to calculate what white nations owe Black nations, even in terms of repatriations, right? There will still be lots of change left after you wipe off our debts. That's the point. But that's racism right there. And then what you also see is how whiteness is centered in how, so to even lend money, they go, well, if we're going to give you this money, you have to behave in a certain way because this is what democracy is. You can't tell a nation what democracy should be to them. Goodness. I mean, look at the genesis of democracy, the Greeks. Look at how it has transformed in different countries. Yes, we talk about the rule of law, but what is the rule of law? So maybe in Africa as a continent, we have Afrocracy, right? A whole different definition, but it doesn't mean that anybody's above the law. It just means that you can't come with a one-size-fits-all approach and expect African countries to just follow through. It's nonsense. Or when they come with their one-size-fits-all definition of corruption, I think it's such utter nonsense. Corruption is awful. It's terrible. We understand the visible and invincible impact of corruption, but corruption exists here. The same turning up the nose and going, oh, that's just corrupt behavior from that country. What country is that? Oh, that's Nigeria. It's very corrupt. I'm sorry. You're more corrupt than the same Nigeria you're pointing hands at. Why? Because you call it legal corruption here. Lobbying, legal corruption. You take with one hand, you give with one hand, and you take with the other. Yeah. You camouflage it like, oh no, we're for the people. Heck no, you're not for the people. You're stealing from the very people you claim you're protecting. You just have this rose-tinted glass, thinking, okay, let's do things behind the scenes. But you call all these other countries that you refer to as third world countries as corrupt. What is Donald Trump doing? The United States of America is the land of the free world. And it has a president hiring his own family, paying his own family out of the coffers of government. If we did that in Nigeria, if you did that in South Africa, if you did that anywhere else, the entire international community, particularly the white nations, would turn up their nose and go, that's not proper. But nobody's saying jack all to the United States of America. Can you see the imbalance there? That's all part of it. That's all part of it.
Yeah. I do want to give our audience the chance, to ask. And I'm going to, for my end with this question. It was written by our students. And what would your message today be to the young and the marginalized women? And if you could speak to your older, younger undergraduate self, what would you let them know?
I would say to women particularly, and the younger women, this is your time to shine. This is your time for your authentic self to stand out in a way that you never have before. The suffragettes were 100 years ago. They did their bit. They're not coming back because the world is waiting for you, young woman, with your ideas and your ambition, to bring everything you have to the table, to break down the hierarchy of patriarchy, to shut down the nonsense of oppression and suppression, to say no, to lend a helping hand to people of other race, other faith, other background, to understand that you don't have to experience suffering, the same suffering, to recognize it in somebody else. Look, as long as I've experienced suffering before, I can recognize it in somebody else. I don't have to experience the same kind of suffering. And that should be enough for me to go, how can I help? Where can I step in? And I say this not just about women, but men as well, right? So if I was speaking to my younger self, this is what I'd say. Life is full of surprises. Get ready to have a roll. Um, you don't have all the answers, and it's okay not to have all the answers. You don't know everything. It is okay not to know everything, right? And I'll say to my younger self that you're going to make some mistakes along the way, and that's fine too, right? That is going to be part of the making of you. And it's so important for us to live in the present. Because I remember, if I was talking about my 30s, for instance, I know I look like I'm in my 20s, right? I know. Well, anyway, I feel like in my 30s, I was living for the future because everything I was doing was planning for tomorrow. And then the moment I achieved that, I'm trying to get something else for tomorrow. So it wasn't until I hit 40 that I went, hold up a second. I've not lived in the present for the longest time. So it's so important for us to live in the present, enjoy the present while planning for the future. So yeah, I would say to my younger self, grab the bull by the horns and ride it to within an inch of its life, because life is a gift and you don't get it twice. You get it just once.
Thank you. I sure do have more questions, but I think maybe let's hear from Jack and Daniel. Just if our audience have.
Thank you. Yeah, we've it's been a really interesting talk. Yeah, thank you so much, both of you. We've got a few questions from the YouTube stream, and if you're watching on the YouTube stream, do feel free to put some more questions there. We've got one from Akira. If racism is rooted in capitalism, is Black capitalism the logical solution to Black empowerment or socialism?
Okay, so capitalism in itself, let me start by saying this. When you say Black capitalism, if you're referring to supporting Black businesses and Black financial empowerment, of course, Black people, ethnic minorities, all people should have equal access to be able to make, to have that kind of empowerment without relying on a system or somebody to give it to them, okay? I find that the issue of those with the power, or the issue with those with the power, is how they use it. So let's understand that there are people with financial power who use it for good, who use it for good. Is that correct? I'm hoping that the person on YouTube is listening going, yeah. So it's not just the system, it's those behind the system, the intention of those behind the system that drives how capitalism is used. Right? Because if capitalism, if you have access to run business, your business, and you're given the same financial access and you have success, right? And the way the system works ensures that all businesses contribute to how societies run, and everybody has that parity in income, then we would not be talking, we would not have the same level of issues that we have in terms of the wrong side or the bad side of capitalism. Yes? So it is how it is being used. So I believe in capitalism, I believe in socialism as well. So that does not make me a socialist. I just believe that as an individual, I can use my capital, I should work hard, get my capital, but I can use my capital to do good for the wider good. Do you understand what I mean? So that is how I think things can work on both sides. I do not believe that I don't believe that because you've got financial success or financial empowerment, you should not recognize that those who have less should not be helped. They must be helped. That's the way I see both capitalism and socialism can intersect. But I am not your, excuse me, I'm not your, I remember someone saying to me, or accusing me, if I may, it's the way they said it, oh, you're a Marxist. I'm like, I've never read a single material on Marxism in my entire life. So how am I a Marxist, right? So I think just to round up on the question, we must support Black businesses. The system must ensure the same level of financial access to capital as non-Black or white entrepreneurs get. Absolutely. And from there, we can get some parity. But that's only one of the issues, one of the issues, right? And we can all work together to make that happen.
We've got another question from Asha. As a Black woman, how do you empower yourself? And do you have any advice for us young Black women who are trying to navigate a world that perpetuates misogyny?
Whew, that misogyny is just another level of God give me strength, honestly. I think, look, I draw my strength from my faith. So I believe in God. I'm a woman of faith. So for me, that is my foundation right there. Okay? So that even when people come at you and attack you, I kind of feel God reminding me of who I am. I remember someone putting a note on my I don't know what's my YouTube channel, say, "Oh, you Black monkey," or "You're ugly." And even though in that second, in a nanosecond, as I was reading the message, within the same nanosecond was my faith reminding me that I am wonderfully and fearfully made by God. I just smiled. I said, "Oh, I'm beautiful." Sometimes, or all of the time, should I say, you have to go back to your roots. Because if your roots is superficial, then when the misogyny and all of that comes, it's going to move you. It's going to be like, it's going to be like a house made out of sand, right? When the rain falls, what's going to happen? It's going to totally dissolve. But you need to be a house made of bricks. And those bricks are your roots that tells you and teaches you and holds you strong regardless of what storm comes by. Misogyny is a real issue. There is no doubt about it. It's another level of misogyny that people immediately go, "Well, we just criticize," and that's nonsense. That noir in there is a different level of anti-Black women. And it can often be very violent, even with the words spoken. And violence in itself, it doesn't mean someone is slapping in the face. Words can be used in such a way that would have a negative impact on someone's life. So the way, and I'm just being perfectly honest, my roots and my foundation is in my faith. And you always have to remember who you are and always be authentic. Because you see, if you speak with somebody else's voice or you speak with somebody else's words, you can't defend it. But when I speak with my voice and with my words, my passion, and what I think, I can defend that. So if you're trying to be like everybody else and you're going with the flow never works. You were not created to go with the flow. You were created to be the flow. Let everybody else come flow with you. That's how I think we must always represent and be authentic in everything we do.
We've got another question from Asha there. What are your thoughts on the term BAME?
Oh, fuck, don't get me started. Look, we need to drop the BAME, okay? And I'll tell you why. I use BAME because, especially when you're on Twitter, right? You're only giving so many characters. So you're like, because you're talking on a wider scale about all ethnic minorities. But the problem with the BAME is that now it seems as though BAME is satisfied as long as you tick the box for one of them. So BAME means Black, Asian, and ethnic minority groups, right? So now you have you have Asians taking, treated, or Asians are as long as you have an Asian person, they're like, we take the BAME box. You have a Black person, oh, we take the BAME box. What is happening is it has ended up excluding marginalized groups within the Black, Asian, ethnic minorities. I remember a Sky interview with Matt Hancock, and he was asked a very simple question. The question posed to him was, how many Black people are in Boris Johnson's cabinet? This man comes up, oh, we've got Black people, Priti Patel, Rishi Sunak. They're not Black. But you see, in their heads, well, that's BME. We have people of color. That's the problem. it has now become such a tick box exercise that it's easy to ignore one section as long as you have one of them, or just get any of them from that pool, and we're satisfied. So now I'm very much in favor of dropping BAME. If I use it now, I try to spell it out. You know what I mean? But yeah, I find that it's problematic. I find it's problematic because it has now become an excuse to even exclude Black people. As long as we've got one of those ethnic minorities, that's fine.
I 100% agree with you, and I want to quickly, like I'm Arab. Technically speaking, I'm BAME, but I'm the most white passing person in the world, right? And what does it mean? Like I'm already privileged within the BAME space, right?
Right.
Sometimes we forget we forget that basically.
I think, like I said, it becomes an excuse to get rid of the troublemakers. It becomes a tick box exercise, and they say, well, as long as we've got one of them, right, that's fine. And now that we know that is what is being done, and it's been done for a long time, we need to put a stop to that. So, like I said, when I use BME, I try to use it in very clear terms. So if I'm talking about Black people, I just say Black people, period. I'm only talking about Black people. I'm not ignoring everybody else. I'm just saying what I'm talking about right now are Black people, or what I'm talking about right now are Asian people. And if there's a reason to bring everyone together, I try to make that context very clear.
Yeah. So we've got one more question, I think will be a good one to end on, from Sinead and Joe. How do we combat apathy among privileged people who claim not to be racist, but are actively anti-racist?
Great question. I think it all starts with intention. You can't force people to want to change. They have to be ready to change. And the way I see it is, one of the things I say is, if you are in the position to observe someone's, apathy, someone's complicity, call it out. You're doing them a favor by calling it out, by saying to them, that thing you just said, or that thing you just did, or this thing that you just ignored, or didn't you just see? Because if they can't see it, point out that this just happened in front of you. Why didn't you say anything? The point is, we live in a society that some of us, if we have friends or colleagues that are oblivious, we allow them to continue to be oblivious by not saying anything. That is a problem. This does not mean you're going to force them to be who they're not. No. But at least for your peace of mind, by giving them the truth or educating them at the point that you can educate them on, they cannot feign ignorance. Because that's one of the big things when people go, oh, but I didn't know that. Well, actually you did, because I remember saying this to you 6 months ago or 2 years ago. So you can't say you don't know because it's here. People go, well, I didn't see that. And I'm like, wait, hold up a second. Haven't you been watching the news? Don't you read the papers? This is why when I had that interview on This Morning with Philip Schofield, and he asked me the question, well, can you give us examples of racism against Meghan Markle? I said, what have you been reading this last 2 years? Oh, I haven't seen anything racist. What have you been reading? How do you interpret this as not racist, as just being criticisms? And this is not just Philip. Philip is an example of many people who don't see it because, some people can't see what they don't experience. So I would say, in such circumstances, call it out. And if you are such a person who thinks, well, I'm walking on eggshells around people, I don't really know what to say, I don't really know what to think, I'd say to you, go to somebody you feel safe with. If you don't have Black friends, go make Black friends. But go to your Black friends that you feel safe with and have a conversation. By all means, read, because people will recommend books to you, but not everybody is good at reading. And I don't mean they can't read. I mean, for some people, reading a book is not their thing. I mean, my husband can't read to save his life. He's more visual. He needs numbers. He needs, documentaries. That's the kind of thing that engages him. I love to read books. So I say a lot, and I like to talk. Can you tell? So I say, if you're the kind of person that likes to have a conversation, find someone who knows you well and have a safe conversation with them. Air out all the cobwebs in your head. Bring out the things that you're not so sure of. They may shout at you, but that's okay. They're your friend already, right? You may even argue with them because you have a difference of opinion. That's okay. But you have to have somebody safe that you can say these things to. I sometimes say this to my kids. I'm like, listen to me. Don't go out there and make that comment, okay? If you have any questions, come to mommy and daddy, and I'll help to clear whatever cobweb is in your head on whatever issue that they're seeing or experiencing. Because sometimes you will say the wrong thing. The important thing is understanding why it's wrong so you don't make the same mistake.
Thank you very much. It's been a fantastic talk tonight. Thank you so much to both of you. It's been really informative, and I'm sure I speak for everyone who's been watching along on YouTube that it's been absolutely fantastic. So thank you both so much. And also, it goes without saying, thank you to Dan and to Sinead, who've put on the event tonight, and without them we probably wouldn't be here. So thank you very much. But again, one last word for Dr Shola Mos-Shogbamimu and Sabiha.
Well done on saying my name so well. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.